2 Samuel 10, reading just verses 1 and 2 to start out. And it came to pass after this that the king of the children of Ammon died, and Hanun his son reigned in his stead. Then said David, I will show kindness unto Hanun the son of Nahash, as his father showed kindness unto me. And David sent to comfort him by the hand of his servants for his father. And David's servants came into the land of the children of Ammon. But something's going to happen to them, and we'll get to that in just a second. Today's sermon is titled Division Revision. Division Revision. And it's up there on the screen. Revising how we look at the divisions in our life. There are divisions all throughout life, right? Relationships get divided, things get divided, and this chapter is all about things that got divided. Now, isn't it true that in our country we're kind of divided right now? There's a lot of division in our country right now. I find it interesting how even if we're going through a chapter by chapter in a book, that often the chapter we come to speaks to what we need to hear in our lives at that moment. I actually had thought about skipping chapters 8, 9, and 10 in 2 Samuel, because when I was coming up to them, I was like, you know what, it's just 2 chapters of battles and 1 small story about Mephibosheth, and what kind of sermons can we get from those 3 chapters? But decided to go through them anyway. I'll tell you what, there has been gold in these chapters that we can find. And so we come to chapter 10, and there's a story here about David trying to show kindness to somebody, but it got thrown back into his face. That ever happened to you? Try to do something good for somebody and it just gets thrown back in your face. Your motives get taken for granted. This past, a couple months ago, when the coronavirus shut down schools, Reese Witherspoon, Reese Witherspoon from Legally Blonde, the actress, she's a producer, she's an entrepreneur. She owns this company called, what's it called? It's called Draper James. It's a clothing company. And they sell women's clothing, they sell dresses, among other things. And so when schools got shut down and teachers were trying to figure out how to do this remote learning and everything, Reese Witherspoon wanted to show some kindness to teachers. And so she and her company put out on Instagram a statement that any teachers that fill out a form and send in proof that they're actually teachers would get a free dress from their store. And their dresses cost $100 to $200. I looked them up. And so, it's a pretty nice gift. And they just wanted to show some love to teachers. They had planned to give away 250 dresses, which comes out to about $40,000 worth of things they were going to give away. Now, the company is small, only has about 30 employees, and so they thought, we can manage this. They put it on Instagram. The next day, 2 TV talk shows, morning talk shows, picked up on the story and told all their audience. Next thing they know, they had 1 million teachers request a free dress. Literally 1 million teachers requested a free dress. And they were now stuck in a weird situation because they had 250 to give away and 1 million people that wanted them. And so they apparently they had personally contacted all those people, probably through email or something. And they explained the situation. They said it's going to be a raffle. We're going to put all the names in and pull 250 out. And so 250 teachers were happy, and 900,000, whatever, were not happy. Well, it kind of was a little bit bust there, but then it got worse. This past week, a handful of those teachers decided to sue Reese Witherspoon for not being more generous. Yes, there's a current lawsuit against her and her company saying that they misled people and were just trying to get information and they need to pay up and give everybody a dress. Which, to give everybody a dress, is 7 times the amount of dresses they sell in 1 year. And so That's a situation of trying to do something nice and you get thrown back. Isn't there the saying that no good deed goes unpunished? You heard that? So if you've ever been there, if you've ever been like her, that you try to do something good and it gets thrown back, then you know how David feels in this story. 2 Samuel 10, like I said, is a chapter of division. It has a theme of division. In this chapter, we're going to see beards divided in half. We're going to see clothing divided in half. And we're going to see armies divided in half. And so, get ready. This is the book about division. But really, this chapter introduces a theme for the rest of 2 Samuel. Because in the rest of 2 Samuel, there is division in almost every chapter. There's going to be David's morality that gets divided, David's loyalty that gets divided, David's family that gets divided, and ultimately David's kingdom that gets divided. And so this chapter introduces a new wave, a new theme in this book, and it's not a happy theme. Now, what I want to show you here on the screen as we go through here is 4 ways that division is a creeper. Nobody likes creepers. 4 ways that division can creep into our lives, into our relationships. And then 1 way that division can be counteracted. Okay. So first of all, number 1, division creeps in when we begin to believe wrong assumptions about each other. Division creeps in when we begin to believe wrong assumptions about each other. There's a story about a wife's diary compared to her husband's diary. And this is what the wife's diary said. Tonight, I thought my husband was acting weird. We made plans to meet at a nice restaurant for dinner. I was shopping with my friends all day long, so I thought he was upset at the fact that I was a bit late. But he didn't make any comment about it. Conversation wasn't flowing, so I suggested that we go somewhere quiet that we could talk. He agreed, but he didn't say much. I asked him what was wrong. He said nothing. I asked him if it was my fault that he was upset. He said, I'm not upset. He said it had nothing to do with me and not to worry about it. On the way home, I told him I loved him. He smiled slightly and just kept driving. I can't explain his behavior. I don't know why he didn't say I love you too. I mean, when we got home, I felt like I lost him completely, as if he wanted nothing to do with me anymore. He just sat there quietly and watched TV. He continued to seem distant and absent. Finally, with the silence all around us, I just decided to go to bed. About 15 minutes later, he came to bed. But I still felt that he was distracted. His thoughts were somewhere else. He fell asleep. I cried. I don't know what to do. I'm almost sure his thoughts are with someone else. My life is a disaster. Husband's diary. How in the world did Florida lose to Florida State? I cannot believe it. Period. Oh, when we just assume what people are thinking, it can lead to wrong assumptions, right? And we've probably all experienced that, where we thought somebody was thinking something and turned out it wasn't what they were thinking. And we felt like we had to be on the offensive because they're thinking bad about me, and really they were just thinking about football or something. Look what happens here. Verses 1 and 2. David says, okay, verse 2, I want to show comfort to this guy named Hanan. In the last chapter we were just in, David showed loving kindness to a man named Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was the son. His father had died, and David wanted to show some love, kindness to the son. And that's what he did, and it worked out really well in chapter 9. The word that was repeated there was the Hebrew word chesed, which means kindness or loving kindness. Now, here in chapter 10, David wants to do it again. He's like, oh, here's somebody else I can show chesed to. Somebody else I can show kindness to. All right, that king over there, Nahash, he died. His son's the new king. I'm going to send messengers to go and tell him how sorry I am that his dad died, how much I'm feeling for him, and maybe send a gift or two, just to show some loving kindness to somebody else. That's what David wants to do. And so it says that he sent some of his representatives to Hanan. Side note, his dad, Nahash, his dad's name means the serpent. So you could think what people thought about him. In fact, there's a story about him in 1 Samuel where Nahash, the king, attacked a city called Jabesh Gilead. And he said to the people there, you can either all die, or you have a choice. You either all die, or you can all be my servants. But if you're my servants, I'm going to gouge out your eyes. So you choose. And they were like, what do we do? Die or lose our eyes? What do we do? And so they called for Saul, who was the new king. Saul got an army together, and he came and he defeated Nahash, pushed Nahash back, rescued the people of Jabesh Gilead. So I'm thinking Nahash didn't like King Saul too much, but apparently Nahash had been kind to David. Maybe because Saul didn't like David either, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so he had been kind to David, apparently. And David's like, okay, Nahash was kind to me. I'm going to be kind to his son. I want to show that hesed to his son, just like his dad showed to me. Verse 3. The princes of the children of Ammon said to Hanan, their king, do you think that David really wants to honor your father? That he sent comforters unto you? Hath not David rather sent his servants unto you to search the city and spy it out and overthrow it? They're like, don't be such a fool. David conquers everybody. David's not coming to show kindness. He's coming to spy and to overthrow you as king. Which is what sometimes kings would do. They would try to overthrow each other. It happened. But they're like, we know what David's real motives are. He says he wants to be kind, but we see through it. We know that he's going to try to hurt you, so you need to hurt him first. A preemptive strike. Verse 4. So Hanan took David's servants, shaved off one half of their beards, cut off their garments in the middle, even to their buttocks, and sent them away. It's not often you can say the word buttocks in church. It's in the Bible. So look what happened. Hanan says, okay, they're really spies. Now, David had sent people to be his messengers, his ambassadors, his representatives. And he wanted these representatives to be people that would show kindness. But Hanan takes them and treats them despicably. Division creeps in when we begin to believe wrong assumptions about each other. This month has been a crazy month. Well, the last couple months. This whole year has been crazy. 2020 has been a crazy year. I heard somebody say that at the end of every month in 2020, we should have Oompa Loompas come out and teach us the lesson we should have learned. But it doesn't happen. It's just been a crazy year. And one of the things that's bothered me, though, is the virility that I see on social media toward each other. Haven't you seen that? People just angry toward each other. People, you don't agree with me? Well, you must be a racist, or you must be full of hate, or you must be this, or you must be that. There's these assumptions that if you don't think like me, then there's something wrong with you. Just this week, J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, she made a statement that she did not agree with people who were trans. I think it was in the situation of men who were trans women. She was like, they're not really women. And she started getting such hate this week. Have you heard about it? She's been called a hateful transphobic bigot who needs to be boycotted and shut down because she shared her opinion on something. And I read her opinion. It was not written in a hateful way. She was actually trying to write in a kind way. She was just saying, this is what I think. But if you don't think the way somebody thinks, they're going to call you a bigot. And that can go from all directions, right? I mean, I could stand up here and talk about stuff in our country all morning long, and that wouldn't be very profitable for us. But I think there's a problem when people assume that somebody else is either stupid or ignorant or a snowflake or a thug or a racist or a hateful or childish just because they disagree with me. And I've heard all those words on Facebook this week. We got to be careful about our assumptions. Let's go to number two. Number two, division creeps in when we act rashly without weighing the consequences. When we act rashly. What we saw here with Hanan is he attacks and humiliates David's ambassadors. Remember a few years back when the embassy at Benghazi was attacked? Remember that? It was a huge issue, not because 4 Americans lost their lives, but because one of them was the United States ambassador. And it was also a big issue because nothing was really done about it. And to attack an ambassador is to attack the country. To attack an embassy is to attack the country. You can start a war by attacking somebody's ambassador. And one of our ambassadors was killed, and that was a huge issue that had far-reaching consequences, even today, I think. This is what happens here with David. He sends ambassadors, and they attack them. And I'm thinking David probably sent some men who would have been good at sharing his grief, been good at sharing his tender feelings. He probably chose men who were not his big soldiers, but probably some men who were quick to shed a tear with somebody, some men who were tender-hearted and could speak kind words. And what does Hanan do? He grabs them and does 2 things to them. Cuts off half their beard, which I assume like that, and cuts off their clothes at the belly button. Now, think about this. This was an insult in many ways. For one, for a Jewish man, his beard was everything. Even today in the Middle East, men who are considered men grow beards. You know, you're a boy until you grow a beard. And it was similar back then. I think it's funny how sometimes Christians in America have these different views on beards. Some are like, you have to have a beard to be spiritual. And some are like, if you have a beard, there's something wrong with you. When I was in college, nobody was allowed to have beards because somehow it was ungodly, I guess. And then I think most people are like, you know what, just do what you want. In David's day, a beard was important for a man. And to have his beard cut off was an insult, an embarrassment. To have half of it cut off and half of it left was even more of an insult. And to have somebody do it to you was even more of an insult. And I'm guessing they had to hold these men down, pin them to the ground so they could shave half their face. And then they didn't stop there. They cut their clothes off in the middle, which was an insult to, one, their diplomacy, because they were probably wearing diplomatic clothes to show that they were from David. Insult to diplomacy, also an insult to their dignity because of the location where it was cut off, if you know what I mean. And also it was an insult to their religious identity because Jewish men would often wear tassels on the bottom of their robes, and those tassels represented the word of God that they carried with them everywhere they went. And so to have those tassels cut off along with their clothes was an insult in many ways. They harm the ambassadors and send them back home. Well, David finds out. David meets them. And David says to them, verse 5, he says, wait here in Jericho until your beards grow back. Then you can go home. He knows that they don't even want to go home. until their beards grow back. That's how embarrassed they were. He says, just stay here in this town. When it grows back, you can go home, which was going to be months, I'm sure, many months. Now, David doesn't do anything about it initially here. We don't see him taking any action against Hanan. But what we're going to see here is Hanan takes action against David again. Division creeps in when we act rashly without weighing the consequences. And that's what we've seen that a lot in the news. People acting rashly. Night before last, a black man in Atlanta was shot and killed by a police officer. The man was unarmed, basically. Last night, people came and burned down the Wendy's that he was shot next to. I'm thinking, what do the Wendy's do? I mean, Wendy didn't do anything. But, all around, people are taking rash actions without thinking of the consequences. I'm sure you didn't burn down a Wendy's this week, but what we might be more likely to do is use our words in a rash way. And I see that often. People use rash words. It's funny, but also disturbing. Whenever I see somebody on Facebook say, "No offense, but," and then they say something offensive. Well, it's like, you say no offense, it's going to fix it. No offense, but, or I'm sure people are going to be angry about this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Well, sometimes we need to weigh the consequences of what we do. Now, Hanan did not weigh the consequences. He acted rashly. In the moment, he treated these ambassadors despicably. He treated them in a humiliating way, and it was going to come back and burn him. Number three. Division creeps in when we get angry at the people we should be apologizing to. Isn't that weird how that happens sometimes? Have you ever sinned against somebody and then you found out you were angry about them afterwards? Or somebody sinned against you and then somehow they're angry at you? Hanan here offends David. And then instead of being like, "Oh my word, what did I do? David, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that." Instead, what does Hanan do? Verse 6. When the children of Ammon saw that they stank before David, the children of Ammon sent and hired the Syrians of Beth-Rahab and the Syrians of Zobah, 20,000 footmen, and of King Maacah 1,000 men, and of Ishtar 12,000 men. When David heard it, he sent Joab and all the host of his mighty men. And the children of Ammon came out and put the battle in array by entering the gate. The Syrians, there describes them out in the field there. Hanan, instead of being like, "You know what, I made a mistake," he's like stepping it up. "Let's go to war." And he hires mercenaries. He gets others around. These different Syrian groups, he hires them to go and fight against David. Because maybe in his mind, he still thinks David's going to hurt me, so I have to hurt him first. And so he hires these people. David finds out there's a military, so he sends Joab, his military commander, with, it says, the mighty men. This is the first time the mighty men are mentioned in this book, and later on you're going to see them again, David's mighty men. They're apparently some Navy SEALs, I guess. But Hanan says, okay, instead of apologizing, I'm going to step up this fight. Let's go to number 4. Division creeps in when we start to get lazy in our Christian lives. Division creeps in when we start to get lazy in our Christian lives. Now, this is kind of a little thing that you probably wouldn't see, but did you notice that David sent Joab to fight, but David didn't go to fight himself? David probably felt like, I've done enough, I'm tired, I'm going to stay home and relax for now. Joab, you go take care of this. I'm going to stay home and eat some grapes. That would not be too unusual. Kings did not always go out with the troops. But it's important in this book, in this chapter, because this chapter leads to the next chapter. And the next chapter is the famous, infamous story of David and Bathsheba. It's the story of when David should have been out to war, but instead he stayed home and he got himself caught up in lust. And that lust almost destroyed his kingdom. It starts in chapter 10. But here, he's starting to get lazy. He's starting to be like, oh, you go do it. I'm just going to stay home. David had been successful in everything he had done so far, and often we see God was with him, but there's no evidence in this chapter that God was involved in David's decisions here. It's easy to be tricked into thinking that we've been so faithful to God then that we can take a break for me time. I can take a break and just do something I want to do. Now, it's okay to relax. God lets us relax. God wants us to rest. But there's a danger when I start to think, I deserve it because I've been so faithful to God. I deserve what I want. And often what I want is probably something I shouldn't have. I've been so faithful to God, I can give into this thing a little bit. BJ and I went kayaking yesterday with the Mass boys down in Crystal River. Normally during the summer, for the past 3 or 4 years, Becky and BJ and I go to the Santa Fe River. Have you ever kayaked down the Santa Fe? So if you're going down the Santa Fe River, there are several springs you pass. One is Ginny Springs. You can turn your boats in there and see it. Another one that we like to stop at is Blue Springs. You've been to Blue Springs? If you've not been to Blue Springs, you should try it. Blue Springs is beautiful. And they call it blue because the water looks blue when you're there. But in order to get from the Santa Fe River into Blue Springs, you have to paddle this little canal to get there. And the current is coming against you because it's coming out of the springs, coming to the river. So in order to get there, you have to paddle hard. You have to keep paddling. Otherwise, you're never going to see the thing that you want to see. If you stop paddling, guess what happens? You get pushed into the side or pushed back into the river. It's what happens. Think about our Christian lives like that. If we stop paddling the Christian life, we're not just going to stay where we are, we're going to start to go backwards. Which is why it's so easy when somebody stops living for the Lord to just go further and further into not living for the Lord. Because the current of our world pushes us backwards if we're not pushing forwards. And I think it's what's happening to David a little bit here. He'd been doing so great. He'd been so faithful to the Lord. And he starts to ease up a little bit. He starts to go with the flow a little bit. He starts to stay home like other kings might have stayed home. He starts to take some me time when he should have been doing something else. And he starts flowing backward in his spiritual life. To the point, very next chapter, he commits a terrible sin. It's sad when I follow the Christian news, like things that are happening in churches around the country, stuff like that. You may or may not hear those things, but often I hear about pastors and Christian leaders who end up crashing their ministries because they fell into some sort of sin, or this or that. And it almost always happened because they allowed themselves to have a little break here, a little break there, a little bit of something for themselves, a little sin here, and it built and pushed them back. I heard a story once about a true story about this man who was a ministry leader. I can't remember the ministry, but he would travel the country. He was the head of some ministry. This was back when people just started using computers and the internet, and he discovered chat rooms, and he started getting in these chat rooms and talking to people. He thought, this is so cool, I can talk to people that's not even in my office. Then he found chat rooms that talked about explicit things, and at first he was repelled, and then he was curious, and then he started getting in and talking to people in an explicit way when he probably should have been doing ministry work. And then, little by little, and then he starts talking to this one particular girl, and they have this online relationship. Then he finds out that she's 15 years old, and he still talks to her. And then she says, hey, let's meet up. And he says, no, I can't do that. She's like, yeah, let's meet up. I'll be at such and such truck stop on Friday. And she described what she looked like and everything. And so he wasn't planning on going, but he had to go somewhere else that day. And he thought, well, I'll just drive by there. And so he drives by that exit. He's like, oh, I won't stop the exit. Then he's like, maybe I'll just pull in. Maybe I can at least see her from a distance. And he pulls in the parking lot where she said to park. And he pulls in there. And he sees this group of teenagers and one that looks just like her. And they walk by and she looks at him. And I think she winks at him. And he's like, okay, I'm out of here. And so he starts his car. And as soon as he started his car, he was surrounded by police. Because it was a trap. He had been talking to an undercover officer the whole time. And he lost everything. And how did he get from here to there? He stopped paddling forward and let himself drift backwards. Division creeps in when we start to get lazy in our Christian lives. Let's go to our fifth. And the fifth thing is how we can counteract division. Division is put in its proper place when we let God be God and trust Him. Now, look at verse 11. Or verse 10. Where are we? No, verse 9. Let's go to verse 9. In verse 9, Joab saw the front of the battle was against him before and behind, so he's surrounded before and behind by the enemies. And he chose some of his choice men of Israel, some of his best fighters. And he says this. He says to his brother Abishai, he says, look, I'll take some of our best elite fighters and I'll go fight the Ammonites over there. You take the rest of the guys and fight the Syrians back here. If they get too much for you, we'll come help you. If they get too much for us, you come help us. It was actually a brilliant plan. And so they did. They split their forces because there was division. And it says here in verse 14, it says, when the Ammonites and the Syrians, when they saw Joab and his forces, they ran. They fled. But there's something Joab says here that's really important. In verse 12, he says to Abishai and to the men, he says, be of good courage. Let us play the men, and let's act like men for our people and for the cities of our God. And the Lord will do what seems good to him. May the Lord do that which seems good. In other words, he's saying, we're going to go out there, we're going to fight the battle, we're going to fight to defend God's cities, but God is the one who's going to bring the outcome. And let the Lord bring the outcome that seems good to him. He's basically saying, let's go and do what we need to do, but let's let God be God. And we're just going to trust him with the outcome. And what was the outcome? As soon as they went against them, the Syrians ran away. They were afraid. The Ammonites ran away. Do you think that was God? I think that was God. They didn't even have to fight. They just said, let's trust God. And then the enemies ran away. In the rest of the chapter, the Ammonites do regroup. They're embarrassed. They regroup, get more people to come fight, and they come fight again. And this time David does go out, and David and the Israelites have a huge victory over the enemies. And from then on, the Syrians were like, nah, we're not touching the Israelites. They're too powerful. But I just want to think about what Joab said. Let God be God. Let God do what seems good to him. Division is put in its proper place when we let God be God and trust him. There's something freeing about letting God be God. Because I can still act. I can still do what I feel like I need to do, but the outcome is in God's hand. The outcome's not based on me and how good I do. The outcome's not based on how strong I am. The outcome is in the Lord's hand. I'm just going to let God be God. Our confidence is in Him. This takes away the virility. This takes away the stress. This takes away the anger. There's lots going on in our world right now politically, isn't there? And it's going to get even worse because we got an election this year. What should we do as Christians? Well, we can vote. You can take a stand for things. You can even protest if you want. But in the end, it's not about me. It's not about us. It's about what God's going to do. I'm going to let God be God. And therefore, I don't have to tear down people that disagree with me. Therefore, I don't have to shout hateful things. I don't have to make myself feel bigger than everybody else because it's God. God's going to be God. I'm going to let God be God. There's two kinds of division. Some kind of division is healthy and good, like God division. When I talk about God division, God set some things in the world where divisions have to happen. This school year, in the last quarter, I was helping BJ with biology, and we were studying mitosis. Do you remember mitosis? Has nothing to do with your feet. Well, kind of, I guess. Mitosis is when cells in your body divide and reproduce so that your body can keep living. Mitosis has to happen or you die. And it continues on and on and on, replenishing your skin and everything. If you look at mitosis under a microscope, you see a perfectly healthy cell that gets divided in two. It breaks in two. And then it breaks in two. And division, that kind of division is necessary. Sometimes, think about raising kids. There's changes that go along as kids grow up, right? They go to school. There's a little bit of division there. The parents, you're not with the kids. As kids grow up and leave the nest, there's slowly more division where you're separated. But it's a good thing. You want the kids to grow up. If they were 20 years old and still in diapers, it's going to be a problem. But family change happens. Marriages have changed sometimes. Sometimes the spouse has to go away for work or something, or there's struggles that they go through together and it brings them closer together. That can be a division that's actually helpful. There's life change, like friends that move away. You ever had friends move away? I've experienced that multiple times, or I've moved away and they weren't there when Pam and I moved from Avon Park to Lake City. There's lots of friends we left behind. We still keep in touch with them on Facebook, but you know what? Life changes. It happens. That even churches sometimes have good division. Sometimes churches plant another church, and they say, okay, some of our people are going to go and plant this church. And they're not together anymore. There's a division, but it's a good division. Sometimes somebody in the church wants to be a missionary, and they commission them to go out, and they're not with you anymore, but it's a good kind of division. But then there's also destructive division. That's kind of what we've been talking about. And that's what I call man division. Man division is different forms of betrayal. Like family betrayals. Kids separated from their parents. Children rebelling. Families estranged. Marriage betrayals. Adultery, abuse, abandonment. Friendship betrayals. Lies, assuming things. Gossip, church betrayals, like people getting angry over stuff that should have been resolved. It helps to know if our division is man-caused or God-caused. It helps to think about that. Because some things, it's just because God is bringing us through a season in our life. And other things are because of sin. But either way, God can use it all for His purposes. That's a good thing. Whether it's man division or God division, He can use it for His purposes. Think about Jesus in His last hours of life. He was betrayed by a friend. He was denied by another friend. He was taken, Scripture says, by wicked hands and nailed to a cross. Were those all wicked things? Yeah. Were they sinful things? Yeah. But was God using those things? Absolutely. As we come to the table, Jesus was put to death, and we celebrate because His death was for our life. But it doesn't take away the fact that it was wicked hands that did it at that time. But God used wickedness for good. So what should I do with my divisions? What should I do with my divisions? If you have divisions in relationships, if you have divisions in whatever, what should I do with them? Simple answer. Bring them to Jesus. Bring them to Jesus. The ambassadors of David were sent and their beards were shaved off. Jesus' beard was plucked out. Their clothes were cut in half. Jesus' clothes were removed from him. They were humiliated. Jesus was humiliated even more. They were treated badly. Jesus was executed. Jesus understands all that. He understands division. He knows we bring our divisions to Jesus. So as we come to the table, for communion, even in the table, we have a phrase, "This is my body broken for you, my body divided for you." As we come to the table that was from division, let us bring our division to the table. Let's lay our assumptions at the feet of Jesus. Let's lay our rash actions at the feet of Jesus, our lazy inactions at the feet of Jesus, our anger, our apathy at the feet of Jesus. Let's lay it down and relish the forgiveness and grace and trust God to be God. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you that we have your word to study. We thank you that we can learn even from chapters like this. As we come to the table, may we remember what Jesus has done for us. And may we bring our divisions and lay it before him. We pray in Jesus' name.